Tonight, I bring you 8 of the most disturbing crime stories ever buried beneath the frozen silence of Canada. In this episode, we will descend into the darkest corners of a nation that prides itself on safety and politeness, only to uncover what happens when that facade cracks open. These are not folklore. These are not urban legends passed around campfires. What you are about to hear are confessional accounts adapted from real encounters with vanishing, obsession, predation, and rituals that defy rational explanation. Each story has been reconstructed from the fragmented memories of those who survived long enough to speak, from those who still check their locks at 3 in the morning, and from those who now understand that isolation is not protection, it is opportunity. To preserve the privacy and security of the individuals involved, certain names and identifying details have been altered, but the essence of what happened to them remains untouched. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to daily true crime content that will keep you questioning every quiet street and every familiar face. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. And before we begin, leave a comment below telling me which type of crime unsettles you the most. Now let us begin. My name is Ryan, and for most of my life I believed that rural Canadian highways were the safest places in the world. Long empty stretches of road, snow drifting across the asphalt, radio static, and the kind of silence that makes you feel like the world has been put on pause just for you. I grew up with people telling me that bad things happened in cities, not out where the land opens up and you can see headlights from miles away. I held on to that belief right up until the night I almost did not make it home. That was the night I understood that distance does not protect you. It isolates you. This happened about 8 years ago in late January. I was driving alone from a small northern town back toward my place in Sudbury after visiting a friend who had just had a baby. The visit had gone later than planned, and by the time I pulled out of their driveway, the temperature had dropped below -20, and a light freezing fog was starting to roll in, the kind that hangs low over the pavement and swallows your headlights. My truck was old, a beat-up half-ton that my uncle helped me keep running. The heater never quite caught up with the cold, so I was bundled in layers, watching my own breath fog up inside the cab every time I spoke to myself. The highway I chose was not the main route. It was an older, quieter stretch that cut through a lot of forest and rock, the kind of road truckers use when they want to avoid way stations and tourists. I had taken it dozens of times. I knew the long straight sections where you could see nothing but black trees and snowbanks, and I knew every gas station that still kept its lights on after dark. That night, though, I did not pass a single open station after the first hour. Most of the time, there were no other vehicles at all. Just me, a ribbon of pavement, and the feeling that the whole world had turned its back. About halfway through the drive, my engine gave a little sputter. It was subtle, like the truck cleared its throat. The dashboard lights flickered. I told myself it was nothing, probably bad gas or the cold. A few minutes later, it happened again, this time with a slight jerk under my feet. The headlights dimmed for a second and came back. The nearest town was still close to 40 minutes away. I remember thinking, do not stall here. Not now. Not in this cold. When I saw the rest pull off, I felt a rush of relief. It was not a real rest stop, just one of those small gravel areas shoved off the side of the highway with a single streetlight and an overflowing trash bin. I had used it once before to check a map. That night it looked like a tiny island of yellow light floating in the dark. There was already a vehicle there, an older pickup parked directly under the pole. Its engine was off, no other lights on the road. I told myself it was fine. People pull over to nap or check their phones. I eased my truck in behind it, leaving a bit of space between us. The engine gave one more shudder as I put it in park, then died completely. All the dash lights snapped off. For a second I sat there, staring at my reflection in the black windshield, listening to the ticking of cooling metal. My stomach sank. I tried the key again. The engine did not even try to turn over. Just a weak click. I felt that first little twinge of panic. I was alone, the air was turning sharper by the minute, and my phone, when I pulled it out, showed exactly 0 bars. I had just started to run through my options when the driver's door of the other truck opened. A man climbed out, his breath puffing white in the light. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s, stocky, wearing a dark jacket and a toque pulled low. He shielded his eyes from the streetlight and walked toward me with an easy, casual pace, like this was all very normal. "Truck giving you trouble?" he called, voice rough but friendly. I hesitated only a second before opening my door. The cold hit me like a slap. I tried to sound calm. "Yeah, it just died on me, won't even turn over." He nodded, glancing at my hood. "Happens in this cold. Could be a loose connection, could be the battery. Pop the hood. I have a look. I am a mechanic." Those words made me instantly feel safer. A mechanic, right here in the middle of nowhere. What were the odds? He moved with the confidence of somebody who knew his way around engines, and I wanted to believe my night had just gotten lucky. I pulled the lever and heard the hood latch release. He walked around to the front, propped it open, and started fiddling around with something inside. From the driver's seat, all I could see was his back silhouette and his hands moving under the hood. The streetlight put his face mostly in shadow. I heard the faint metallic clink of tools. He did not ask me many questions. Did not mention where he was headed or why he was parked there with his engine off in that kind of cold. I told myself he must have stopped to smoke or check something. My brain was already busy trying to fit him into a harmless story. "Try the key," he said after a minute. I tried it. Nothing. Just the same dry little click. He cursed softly. "Yeah, thought so. Loose wire. Nothing serious. Come up here a second, I show you. You should know where it is so this does not happen again." He said it like it was no big deal. "Come up here. Look at this thing. Learn something useful." I remember shifting in my seat, leaning toward the door, then stopping. There was something in the way he said it that made a little warning bell go off in the back of my head. I could not have explained it then. It was not what he said as much as how he said it. There was a hint of impatience under the friendliness, something rehearsed. "I am terrible with engines," I called back, forcing a laugh. "You could show me and I would still mess it up." He paused, then went back to rummaging. Nah, it is easy. Just come up and take a quick look. 1 second, then you never get stuck like this again." I watched his hands as best I could through the gap between the hood and the windshield. They were moving, but not like he was following wires. More like he was feeling around for something, searching a particular area. My eyes drifted to my side mirror. The highway was still empty. No distant glow of headlights. The night felt thicker. He asked me to come look 2 more times in the next couple of minutes. Each time, his tone got slightly too casual, like he was trying to keep something in his voice from showing. Each time, I gave a different excuse. My boots were not laced properly. It was freezing. I trusted him to handle it. I heard myself saying these things and knew I sounded rude, but there was a part of me that refused to move from that seat. The steering wheel under my hands felt like the only solid thing in the world. There is a particular kind of fear that starts slowly, like water seeping into a crack. At first you tell yourself you are being ridiculous. Then little details start floating to the surface. His truck had no visible company logo, no magnetic signs saying he was a mechanic. The bed was covered so I could not see if he had tools. The way he stood kept his face angled away from the light, so I never really got a good look at him. Every time I asked what he thought the issue was, he gave the same vague answer. Loose wire, that is all. Just come up here and I will show you." There was no annoyance in his voice when I refused, but there was an edge of resistance, like my reluctance had not been part of whatever script he was following. I was just about to tell him I would figure something else out, maybe try to flag someone down, when everything changed. A new set of headlights rolled over us, bright and sudden, cutting through the fog. Another truck turned off the highway into the pull-off, crunching slowly over the packed snow. Its engine stayed running, exhaust curling white in the air. The man under my hood froze. For the first time since he approached my vehicle, he looked directly up toward the new truck. In that moment, in the angle of his shoulders, I saw something like panic. He slammed my hood shut harder than he needed to. The bang made me jump. Without a word to me, he walked fast to his own truck, climbed in, and started it. His tires spun for a second on the icy gravel. Then he tore back onto the highway, disappearing into the dark faster than I would have thought possible in those conditions. I sat there, heart pounding, door still open, watching his taillights shrink into nothing. The whole thing had shifted so quickly that it took my brain a few seconds to catch up. Why would a mechanic who had been so eager to help, so insistent on me coming up to see the problem, suddenly abandon the job the second another vehicle showed up? The new truck pulled up beside me but kept a respectful distance. A man got out, pulling his jacket tighter around him. He looked ordinary, tired, like someone who had spent too many years working in the cold. This time the logo on his door was clear in the yellow light. It was the name of a nearby garage, one of the few still operating up that way. "You Ryan?" he called. My mouth went dry. "Yeah? Sorry I took so long. Phone signal is garbage out here." He nodded toward the highway. "Who was that just left in such a hurry?" That was the moment I realized the first man had never given me his name, never mentioned a garage, never asked mine. My brain scrambled for an answer. "I thought that was you," I said. "He said he was a mechanic. He was looking at my engine." The new man frowned. "No, just me tonight. Nobody else on call." He walked to the front of my truck, lifted the hood, and peered inside with a small flashlight. A second later, he swore softly. "Hell," he said, "you see this?" I stepped out of the cab for the first time, my legs unsteady, and joined him at the front. The flashlight beam rested on something wedged near the battery and fuse box. It was long and thin, almost the length of my forearm, metal catching the light. For a second I thought it was a weird kind of wrench. Then I saw the shape of it properly. It looked like a hybrid between a blade and a tool. On one end were two rounded loops that could fit fingers like scissors without the usual blades. On the other end, extending out, was a slender shaft ending in a sharp, narrow point. The metal at the tip was clean and bright, reflecting the light. The rest of it had patches of dark discoloration, maybe rust, maybe something else. It had been placed so that it rested across several cables and near the battery terminals. "I did not put that there," the mechanic said quietly. "And it was not there when this truck rolled out of the shop last time. I can tell you that." He reached in carefully and lifted it free, holding it between gloved fingers like it might bite. Seeing it out in the open made my skin crawl. The loops were just big enough for a hand to hold it with control. The pointed end perfectly placed to slip into tight spaces. For a moment I pictured it being held against a throat instead of an engine. "You called me about a no-start," he said, eyes still on the object. "If this thing shifted while you were driving, it could have shorted something, maybe even started a fire. Or you lose power completely. Either way, you would have one hell of a problem out here alone." I stared at the place where it had been resting. My mind flashed back through the last 20 minutes. The first man's insistence that it was just a loose wire. The way he wanted me out of the truck, up by the engine, leaning over with him between me and the open highway. how he left the instant another vehicle appeared. The mechanic looked up at me then, his expression serious in a way that did not match the casual tone of his voice. "I do not know what that guy was doing under your hood," he said slowly, "but I do not like the thought of him having time alone with your truck on a road like this. I think you should call the police when you get to town. At least tell them what happened." He set the object down gently on the snow-packed ground near the curb, as if he did not want it anywhere near the engine anymore. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my keys when he told me to try the ignition. He had reseated a cable and cleaned some corrosion on the terminals. The engine turned over on the first try, roaring back to life like nothing had ever been wrong. Before I left, he picked the tool up again and held it out to me. "You want to keep this? Show it to the cops. Up to you." Everything in me recoiled at the idea of touching it. I did not want my fingerprints on it. I did not want it in my truck. I told him to just toss it, but he shook his head. "Something like this does not just fall into your engine bay," he said. "Someone put it there, on purpose. Think about that on the rest of your drive, but not too hard or you will never sleep again." He placed it in the back of my truck himself, wrapped in an old rag he found behind my seat, then followed me back onto the highway for a few kilometers before turning off at his exit. In my rearview mirror, I watched his headlights until they disappeared, then stared into the dark, half expecting to see the silhouette of that first truck waiting on the shoulder somewhere up ahead. I did call the police when I got home. They listened politely, took some basic notes, and suggested that maybe the first guy had been trying an unorthodox way of jump-starting my vehicle. When I described the object, the officer on the line made a non-committal sound and said it could be some kind of specialized tool. He did not ask to see it. There were no reports, he said, of similar incidents on that highway. No active investigation that matched what I was describing. For a few days after, I wrapped the thing in more cloth and left it in my shed, unsure what to do. Every time I stepped into the shed, I felt like it was watching me. Finally, I threw it away at a dump outside town, tossing it into a heap of twisted metal and broken appliances, hoping it would disappear under the weight of other people's trash. It did not disappear from my head. In the weeks that followed, I started noticing missing person flyers in gas stations along that route. Most of them had been up for months, some for years. A woman whose car was found pulled over neatly on the shoulder, keys still in the ignition. A man who vanished during a January drive between small communities, last seen at a truck stop. The posters had always been there. I had just never really looked. I used to tell myself that if something bad ever happened out on those roads, I would see it coming. That I was good at reading people. That instinct would warn me in time. The truth is, that night I almost stepped out of my truck when he asked me to. I almost walked around to the front, leaned into the dark, and put myself exactly where he wanted me. The only reasons I did not were a faint, stubborn reluctance and the coincidence of a second truck arriving sooner than anyone expected. I still drive that highway sometimes. There are fewer open service stations now, more closed pumps and boarded windows. Every time I pass that little rest pull-off with the single streetlight, I feel my grip tighten on the wheel. I look at the empty gravel and picture two trucks, one mechanic I never called, and a piece of sharpened metal balanced over my engine like a decision. When people tell me they feel safest on lonely Canadian roads, I do not argue. I just tell them to keep their doors locked when they pull over and never ever assume that the first person who offers help is there to save you. My name is Ella, and I do not choose apartments the way most people do anymore. I walk through units with my hand already mapping the distance between the bedroom and the nearest exit. I ask landlords how many other tenants have keys. I check the locks on windows even if I am on the 5th floor. I knock on ceilings to hear how thick they are. People think I am paranoid. Maybe I am. But paranoia kept me alive long enough to learn what happens when you ignore the sounds coming from a place that is supposed to be empty. This story starts when I was 19 in my second year at a mid-sized university in southern Ontario. I had spent my first year in campus residence, sharing a cramped room with a girl who never slept in a bathroom with 8 strangers. By the time second year rolled around, I was desperate for privacy, for my own space, for the feeling of being an adult even if I was still eating discount pasta 3 times a week. I found a small apartment in an older building about 15 minutes from campus. The rent was cheap enough that I could cover it with my part-time retail job and the little bit of help my parents sent. The landlord barely asked me any questions. He handed me the keys, pointed to the unit number, and told me the garbage went out on Thursdays. That should have been my first warning. Nobody makes things that easy unless there is a reason nobody else wants it. The building itself was one of those squat concrete blocks from the 70s, all narrow hallways and fluorescent lights that buzzed when the weather changed. My unit was on the 3rd floor, a bachelor with a galley kitchen and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. It was not beautiful, but it was mine. For the first few weeks, I loved it. I could play music at 2 in the morning. I could leave dishes in the sink without someone leaving passive-aggressive notes. I could exist without performing for anyone. That feeling lasted exactly until the night I heard the footsteps. It was late September, maybe 3 weeks after I moved in. I had just come home from a closing shift, exhausted, and collapsed into bed without even changing out of my work clothes. The building was quiet. Most of the tenants were older, the kind of people who went to bed early and kept their televisions low. I remember lying there in the dark, feeling the day drain out of my body when I heard it. A slow, deliberate creaking from directly above my head. Footsteps, heavy, dragging slightly, moving from one side of the ceiling to the other, back and forth, back and forth. I stared up at the ceiling, frowning. I had been told by the landlord that the unit above me, 4C, was vacant. He said it had been empty for months while they dealt with some kind of water damage. I had never seen anyone go in or out. The door at the top of the stairs always had the same piece of duct tape over the lock, the kind maintenance uses to mark units under repair. But the footsteps were unmistakable. Someone was up there. I told myself it was probably maintenance doing late-night work, or maybe the landlord showing the place to a potential tenant. It did not make sense to do that at midnight, but I was tired and I wanted an explanation that let me go to sleep. The footsteps continued for maybe 10 more minutes, then stopped. Silence. I rolled over and eventually drifted off. The next morning, I went upstairs and checked the door to 4C. The duct tape was still there, unbroken. The door was locked. There were no signs that anyone had been inside recently. No footprints in the dust near the threshold, no smell of fresh paint or cleaning products. I stood there for a long time staring at that door, trying to convince myself I had imagined the whole thing, but I had not. The footsteps came back the next night and the night after that, always starting sometime after 11. Always the same pattern. Slow, deliberate pacing from one end of the apartment to the other, pausing occasionally, then starting again. Sometimes I would hear what sounded like furniture being dragged or something heavy dropping onto the floor. Once, I swear, I heard water running for hours, the pipes groaning through the walls like something was filling and draining over and over again. I called the landlord twice. Both times he insisted the unit was empty, that I was probably hearing sounds from another floor, that old buildings made noise. He sounded annoyed, like I was wasting his time. I started sleeping with headphones in, but even through music I could feel the vibrations in the ceiling. It got to the point where I dreaded going home. I would sit in the library until it closed, then walk slowly back to my building, hoping that by the time I got there it would be quiet. It never was. By November, other things started happening. Small things at first, easy to dismiss. I found a note tucked under my door one morning, folded neatly with no envelope. It was written in pencil on lined paper, the kind you tear out of a notebook. All it said was, "You leave at 8:20 on Tuesdays." That was true. I had a morning class on Tuesdays that started at 9, and I always left at the same time to catch the bus. But anyone in the building could have noticed that. I told myself it was a prank, maybe someone trying to make me uncomfortable. I threw the note away and tried to forget about it. Then it was my mail. I started getting packages I had not ordered, small parcels with no return address, delivered to my apartment mailbox. Inside were things like used batteries, a single sock, a blank USB drive, a hotel key card from a place I had never been. Nothing threatening on its own, but together they felt intentional. Like someone was testing how much I would tolerate before I said something. I reported it to the building manager, who shrugged and said maybe someone had the wrong address. He did not offer to check the security footage. I do not think the building even had working cameras. Then I started seeing him. I do not know when I first noticed, because at first he was just part of the background. A guy around my age, maybe a little older, always in a gray hoodie, always at a distance. I would see him at the bus stop near campus, standing a few feet away, scrolling on his phone. Then I would see him again at the grocery store I used, standing in the aisle with the cereal, staring at the shelves like he was trying to decide on something. Then at the coffee shop where I studied. Then on my street, walking the opposite direction, glancing back just as I turned toward my building. Alone, each sighting was nothing. Together they were a pattern. I told my friends about it during a group study session. One of them laughed and said I probably just lived near him. Another said I was being paranoid, that I watched too many true crime videos. I wanted to believe them. But then one night in late November, I was walking home after dark and I saw him again, this time sitting on the low wall outside my building, smoking a cigarette. He looked up when I approached. Our eyes met. He did not smile, did not wave, just watched me walk past and unlock the door. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get my key in the lock. That was the night I finally went upstairs and banged on the door of 4C. I did not care anymore if I looked crazy. I pounded on that door until my fist hurt, yelling that I knew someone was in there, that I was going to call the police if they did not stop. The door did not open, but the footsteps stopped. For 3 nights, there was silence above me. I thought maybe I had scared them off, whoever they were. I let myself believe it was over. It was not over. It was escalating. The notes started coming more frequently, tucked under my door, slipped into my mailbox, once even left on the windshield of my car. They were specific now. You wore the blue jacket yesterday. You got coffee at 10:15. You talked to the guy with the beard in the library. The last one made my blood run cold because I remembered that conversation. It had lasted maybe 2 minutes, just a classmate asking to borrow a charger. Whoever was writing these notes had been close enough to see, close enough to hear. By the time winter break arrived, I was barely sleeping. I had started varying my schedule, taking different routes, leaving at random times, but the notes kept coming. My parents wanted me to come home for the holidays, but I was too afraid to leave the apartment unattended. I was convinced that if I left, someone would get inside and I would come back to find my things moved. My space violated in ways I could not undo. So I stayed, alone in a building that emptied out as other students went home to their families. It was 2 days after Christmas when the police finally got involved, but not because I called them. A neighbor on the 4th floor, an older woman I had only seen once or twice, called in a welfare check on 4C. She told them she had been hearing strange noises at all hours, and she was worried someone might be squatting in the vacant unit. 2 officers showed up on a quiet afternoon while I was home. I heard them in the hallway, heard the landlord arguing with them, insisting the unit was empty and locked. Then I heard the sound of the door being forced open. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, holding my breath, listening to their voices echo down from the 4th floor. One of the officers came down a few minutes later and knocked on my door. He asked if I was the tenant in 3C. I said yes. He asked how long I had lived there. I told him since September. He wrote something in a notebook, then asked if I had ever noticed anyone going in or out of the unit above me. I told him everything: the footsteps, the water running, the notes, the man I kept seeing. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable, and when I finished, he closed his notebook and told me to wait in my apartment and lock the door. He went back upstairs. I stood in my doorway, staring up at the ceiling, and for the first time since I moved in, I heard voices up there. Real voices, the officers talking to each other, the landlord protesting. Then silence. The officer came back down about half an hour later. This time he was not alone. There was another officer with him and the landlord, and someone in plain clothes I assumed was a detective. The officer asked if I could come upstairs for a moment. My stomach dropped. I did not want to go up there. I did not want to see what they had found. But I followed them anyway, my legs weak, my hands clenched into fists. The door to 4C was open. From the hallway I could see inside. The layout was identical to my unit, the same narrow kitchen, the same bathroom, the same main room. But every available surface was covered. The walls were papered with photographs, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All of me, walking to class, sitting in the library, getting into my car, unlocking my apartment door, sleeping. Some of the photos were taken from across the street, others were taken from much closer, angles that should not have been possible unless someone had been standing right next to me. In the corner of the room was a small folding table covered in notebooks, each one filled with handwritten logs. Dates, times, locations, what I was wearing, who I spoke to, where I went. My entire life cataloged in obsessive detail. The detective asked if I recognized anyone in the building who might have done this. I shook my head. I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. Then he asked if I had noticed anyone following me, anyone who seemed too interested. I thought about the man in the gray hoodie. I described him. The detective exchanged a glance with the other officer, then asked if I had ever spoken to him. I said no. I had only ever seen him from a distance and once outside my building. The detective nodded slowly, then told me they were going to need me to come down to the station to give a formal statement. He said they had reason to believe the person living in 4C had been doing so illegally for several months, that the landlord had not known, and that they had vacated the unit recently, possibly within the last few days. They were going to try to identify him through the photographs and notebooks, and they would contact me if they had any leads. They never contacted me. Weeks went by. I moved out of that apartment the day after I gave my statement, breaking my lease and losing my deposit. I did not care. I stayed with a friend until I could find another place, and when I did, I made sure it was in a different part of the city, in a building with security cameras and a buzzer system and locks that actually worked. I changed my phone number. I deleted my social media accounts. I started wearing hats and scarves even when it was not that cold, anything to make myself harder to recognize from a distance. I tried to find out what happened with the case, but every time I called the police department, I got vague answers. They told me it was still under investigation, that they would reach out if there were any developments. They never did. I checked public records, court filings, arrest reports, nothing. Whoever had been living above me, watching me, documenting me, had disappeared without leaving a name behind. That was 6 years ago. I have moved 4 times since then, always to places where I can see the exits, always to buildings where I know who lives above me. I still catch myself looking over my shoulder in grocery stores, scanning faces on the bus, checking reflections in windows to see if anyone is walking too close behind me. My friends do not understand why I am like this. They think I should be over it by now. They do not know what it feels like to realize that someone was that close, for that long, and you never saw them until it was almost too late. Sometimes late at night when I am lying in bed, I hear footsteps from the floor above me. I know they are just my upstairs neighbor, an older man who works nights and comes home around 2 in the morning. I know this because I introduced myself the day I moved in, because I made sure to learn his name and his schedule and confirm that he actually lives there. But even knowing that, my heart still races when I hear him walking around. My brain still goes back to that apartment, to those photographs on the wall, to the notebooks full of my life written in someone else's handwriting. I do not know where he is now. I do not know if he found someone else to watch or if he is still out there somewhere waiting for me to let my guard down. What I do know is that I will never again assume a vacant apartment is actually empty, and I will never again ignore the feeling that something is wrong just because I cannot see the proof yet. By the time you see the proof, it is already too late to protect yourself from what has been watching you all along. My name is Carter, and I used to think drowning was the worst thing that could happen in water. I grew up spending summers at a family cabin on a remote lake in northern Quebec, the kind of place where the water is so clear you can see straight down to the rocks at 15 feet, where loons call it dawn and the only sounds at night are wind through the pines and the occasional slap of a fish breaking the surface. It was supposed to be the safest place in the world. My parents told me that every summer when they dropped me off to stay with my grandparents for July and August. They said nothing bad ever happened out there because everyone knew everyone and people looked out for each other. That was true until people started going into the water and coming back wrong. The lake itself was not large, maybe 2 miles across at its widest point, shaped like a bent kidney with a dozen small cabins scattered along the shore and thick forest pressing right up to the waterline. Most of the families had been there for generations. My grandfather built our cabin with his own hands in the 60s. The lake had a name on maps, but locals just called it the Back Lake because it sat behind a larger, more popular one that tourists used. We liked it that way. It kept the jet skis and the party boats away. It kept things quiet. The first disappearance I remember was when I was about 12. A kid named Joel, maybe 16, went out alone one evening in a canoe to check his fishing lines. He was the son of a couple who owned the cabin 3 doors down from ours. Everyone knew Joel. He had been coming to the lake his whole life, same as me. He knew which parts were shallow, where the old deadfall trees sat just under the surface, where the current pulled if you got too close to the outlet stream. He was careful. He wore a life jacket. He was not the kind of person you worried about. When he did not come back by dark, his parents went looking. They found the canoe drifting near the far shore, still upright, paddle resting across the seats like he had just stepped out for a moment. His life jacket was in the bottom of the boat, unbuckled. There was no sign of struggle, no damage to the canoe, nothing to suggest what had happened. Search and rescue came in the next morning with divers and sonar. They spent 3 days combing that lake, section by section, mapping every depression and rock pile. They found nothing. Joel's parents stayed at the cabin for 2 more weeks, waiting, hoping, walking the shoreline at sunrise and sunset like they might spot something the professionals missed. Then one morning, 11 days after he disappeared, a fisherman found Joel floating face down in the exact cove where the search team had already looked twice. The body was in shallow water, maybe 4 feet deep, wedged gently against a cluster of rocks in a spot so obvious that anyone walking past should have seen it days earlier. The divers swore they had checked that area. They had photographs proving they had been there. but somehow Joel had not been there when they looked. And then he was. I remember my grandfather standing on our dock that morning, staring across the water toward the cove, shaking his head. He did not say much, but I heard him talking to my grandmother later that night when they thought I was asleep. He said it did not make sense, that bodies do not just appear like that the lake was playing tricks. My grandmother told him not to say things like that, not where I could hear, but I could tell from her voice that she was unsettled too. They said Joel drowned, that maybe he had leaned over to pull up a line and lost his balance, that the cold water and shock could have disoriented him. They said the currents must have moved his body and then brought it back. But I had swum in that lake my entire childhood. There were no currents strong enough to move a body out of a search grid and then return it days later to the most visible spot on the shoreline. That was the summer I stopped swimming past the dock. 3 years later, it happened again. A woman in her 40s visiting family at one of the cabins on the east side went out for an early morning kayak. She was experienced, fit, always up before everyone else to catch the sunrise on the water. When she did not return by mid-morning, her sister called for help. They found the kayak overturned near a rocky point, the paddle floating a few feet away. Another search, another grid. Divers went down in the deeper sections, checked under the docks, dragged hooks along the bottom. Nothing. Then 8 days later, she was found floating in less than 3 feet of water right off the public boat launch, a place that dozens of people had used multiple times during the search. Her body was in perfect view of the parking area. It should have been impossible to miss. I was 15 by then, old enough to ask questions that made adults uncomfortable. I started paying attention to the details no one wanted to talk about. Both bodies had been found in shallow, visible locations after extensive searches had already cleared those areas. Both had reappeared days after vanishing, not weeks or months, but in that strange window where hope was fading but not yet gone. And both times the people who found them said the same thing. It looked like the body had been placed there, not washed up. Too still. Too deliberate. My grandfather had a friend, a retired commercial diver named Lawrence who had worked on ship salvage operations for 30 years. Lawrence had helped with both searches, volunteering his time and equipment. One night he came by our cabin and I listened from the porch while he and my grandfather sat by the fire talking in low voices. Lawrence said he had dove in hundreds of lakes, rivers, and ocean sites, and he had never seen anything like what was happening here. He said water does not hide bodies in searched areas and then give them back. He said the placement was too precise, too clean. He used a word I had never heard before. Curation. Like someone was deciding when the bodies would be found and where. I asked him later what he meant. He looked at me for a long time, then shook his head and said some questions do not have good answers. But I kept asking, kept reading, kept pulling old news clippings from the tiny local library near the general store. I found 5 other incidents going back over 20 years. A teenage girl in 1998, a man in his 30s in 2003, a visiting college student in 2007. Every single case followed the same pattern. Disappearance, search, nothing found. Then days later, the body reappears in a location already searched, shallow and visible, like it had been waiting for the right moment. I started keeping a notebook. I mapped the locations where people went missing and where they were found. I logged the number of days between disappearance and recovery. I noted what items were missing. Shoes, almost always. Jewelry sometimes, phones, wallets, keys. Small personal objects that should have stayed with the body. I made charts of water temperature, weather conditions, and search methods. None of it explained the pattern. If anything, it made the pattern more obvious, more deliberate. The local police dismissed me as a kid with too much time and too much imagination. They said bodies move in water in unpredictable ways, that decomposition gases cause them to surface and sink repeatedly, that search teams are human and make mistakes. But I found one retired officer, a man named Dennis, who had worked 3 of the cases, and he admitted over coffee one afternoon that he had never been able to explain it either. He said every time he closed a case file on one of those drownings, he felt like he was lying in the report, but he did not know what the truth was, so he wrote what made sense and moved on. I am 28 now. I have not been back to the cabin in 6 years. My grandparents passed away and the property got sold to a family from Montreal who use it 2 weeks a year and do not know the history. I moved south for work, got an apartment in a city where the only water I see is in fountains and pools. But I still think about that lake. I still keep the notebook, updated whenever I find a new article or hear about another case. Last year, a man disappeared while fishing from a dock. They found him 9 days later in waist-deep water near the boat launch. Same pattern, same impossible timing. I have tried to talk to experts, people who study water recoveries and search patterns. Most of them humor me for a few minutes, then move on. One forensic specialist said it sounded like someone was moving the bodies intentionally, staging them after the searches ended. But that theory requires a person with access to the lake, the ability to hide a body for days, and a reason to return it. No one has ever been caught. No evidence of human interference has ever been found. The bodies show no signs of restraint, no wounds that suggest violence beyond drowning. Toxicology comes back clean. Everything points to accidental death except for the part where the accidents do not follow the rules of physics and search procedure. I do not swim anymore. Not in lakes, not in rivers, not in any natural body of water where I cannot see the bottom. My friends think it is irrational. They invite me to cottages and beach trips, and I make excuses. I do not tell them why. Because the few times I have tried to explain, I see the look in their eyes. They think I am obsessed. They think I am inventing connections that are not there. Maybe they are right. Maybe I have spent so much time staring at maps and timelines that I have convinced myself of a pattern that is just coincidence and bad luck. But every time I see a news report about a drowning victim found days after a search ends, in a place already checked, I add it to the notebook. And every time the same questions come back. Why does the water wait? What is it waiting for? And when it finally gives someone back, what has it taken in exchange that we are not seeing? I do not have answers. I just have a list of names, a stack of maps, and the growing certainty that some places decide when they are finished with you, and no amount of searching will change their timing. My name is Nora, and I used to think desperation was something you could control, something you felt coming and could step away from before it made you do stupid things. I was wrong. Desperation does not announce itself. It just erodes you quietly until one day you are standing in a place you swore you would never be, agreeing to things you swore you would never do, because the alternative feels worse. That is how I ended up working for a church that was not really a church, in a building that was not really a building for people who were not really trying to save anyone. This happened 4 years ago in a small city in Saskatchewan. I had graduated with a degree in communications, which turned out to be worth about as much as the paper it was printed on, when every entry-level job wanted 5 years of experience and every internship was unpaid. I had been living with my parents, applying to anything that looked remotely legitimate, watching my savings disappear into student loan payments. My parents were patient, but I could see the disappointment every time I came downstairs in the afternoon, still in my pajamas, still unemployed, still going nowhere. I needed a job, any job. I needed to prove I was capable of something. I found the listing on a generic job board, buried between postings for warehouse labor and telemarketers. Administrative assistant needed, Light office work, flexible hours, supportive team environment. The pay was not great, but it was something. The address was listed as an office in an industrial park on the east edge of the city, the kind of area where logistics companies and auto repair shops rent cheap space in prefab metal buildings. It did not mention anything about a church in the posting. I thought I was applying to work for a small business, maybe a startup or a consulting firm. The interview was on a Thursday afternoon. I drove out to the address and found a low, flat building with no sign on the front, just a unit number painted on the door. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few older sedans and a white van with no windows in the back. I remember thinking it looked temporary, like whoever was renting the space had not committed to staying long. I went inside and found a small reception area with folding chairs, a plastic table, and a woman in her 40s sitting behind a desk with a laptop. She smiled when I walked in, the kind of smile that was too wide and lasted too long, and introduced herself as Pastor Diane. That was the first time I heard the word pastor. I must have looked confused because she laughed and explained that the organization was a faith-based community group, non-denominational, focused on spiritual development and mutual support. She said they met in the industrial space because traditional church buildings were expensive and exclusionary, and they wanted to stay humble and accessible. It sounded reasonable. I had been raised going to church occasionally. Nothing intense, and the idea of working for a religious group did not bother me. I needed the job. I told her I was interested. She did not ask many questions about my experience. She asked how I was feeling, if I was struggling with anything, if I had people I could talk to. I told her the truth without thinking. I said I was stressed about money, frustrated with the job market, feeling like I was falling behind everyone I went to school with. She nodded like she understood completely, like she had heard it 1,000 times before. Then she said something I will never forget. She said, "What if I told you that the reason you are struggling is not because you are failing, but because you have not aligned yourself with your purpose yet?" It sounded like self-help nonsense, the kind of thing you see on motivational posters. But when you are that low, when you have been rejected from 30 jobs in 3 months, you want to believe someone has an answer. I told her I would be willing to learn. She hired me on the spot. The work itself was easy at first. I answered emails, updated a basic website, organized schedules for their evening meetings. The group met 3 nights a week in a larger room at the back of the building, a space that had probably been used for storage before they cleared it out and filled it with folding chairs arranged in a circle. I was not required to attend the meetings initially. I worked during the day, left before they started. But Pastor Diane kept inviting me. She said it would help me understand the mission better, that I would feel more connected to the work. After a couple of weeks, I agreed to sit in on one session just to see what it was about. There were maybe 15 people there, ranging from early 20s to late 50s. They sat in a circle with the lights dimmed and a single lamp in the center. Pastor Diane led them through what she called a guided reflection, which was part meditation, part group confession. People talked about their fears, their failures, their shame. Others listened and repeated phrases back to them. "You are seen. You are known. You are held." It felt strange but not threatening. I had been to therapy before. This seemed like a low-budget version of that. They invited me back. I started going once a week, then twice. The meetings always ran late, often past midnight. I would get home exhausted, my head buzzing with the things people had said, the things I had said. Because I started talking too. They asked questions that felt personal but gentle. What was I afraid of? What was I hiding? Who had I disappointed? I told them about my parents, about feeling like a failure, about the fear that I would never amount to anything. And every time I spoke, they responded with affirmations. with reassurance, with the promise that I was exactly where I needed to be. It was Pastor Diane who first suggested I move into the shared housing. She said several members of the group lived together in a rented house on the north side of the city, that it was cheaper than living alone, that I would have built-in support and community. She said my parents were holding me back, that their expectations were part of what was keeping me stuck. I did not want to believe that, but she kept saying it, and others in the group echoed it, and eventually I started to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe I needed distance. Maybe I needed to be around people who understood. I moved in on a Saturday in October. The house was old, poorly insulated, with 7 people sharing 4 bedrooms. There were rules: no alcohol, no outside visitors without permission. Phones were collected during group activities to minimize distractions. Everyone contributed financially, pooling income to cover rent and food. It sounded communal and supportive. It sounded like exactly what I needed. Within 2 weeks, I realized I had made a mistake. The meetings were no longer optional. They happened every night, sometimes starting at 10 and running until 3 in the morning. Sleep became something we were told to sacrifice for growth. Rest was called resistance. If you were tired, it meant you were fighting the process. I started losing weight because we ate on a shared schedule and portions were small. When I asked about it, I was told that physical discipline led to spiritual clarity. The confessions became darker. People were encouraged to share things they had never told anyone. Traumatic memories, shameful thoughts, secrets that made them vulnerable. And every confession was recorded. I did not notice at first, but one night I saw a small device tucked under one of the chairs, a voice recorder running silently while we spoke. When I asked Pastor Diane about it later, she said it was for reflection purposes, so people could go back and hear their own breakthroughs. It did not feel like a breakthrough. It felt like surveillance. There was a woman in the house named Monica, maybe 10 years older than me, who had been with the group for over a year. She was quiet, kept to herself, followed every rule without question. Then one night she was just gone. Her belongings were still in her room, her jacket still hanging by the door, but she was not there. When I asked where she went, Pastor Diane said Monica had decided to leave, that she was not ready to fully commit and had gone back to her old life. But Monica had told me 2 days earlier that she had nowhere else to go, that this group was all she had left. She would not have just walked away. I started searching online late at night when everyone else was asleep, looking for any mention of Monica, any social media activity, any sign that she was okay. I found nothing. It was like she had been erased. I tried to bring it up again carefully, asking if anyone had heard from her. The responses were vague, dismissive. One person said she had been claimed back by what she refused to let go of, the same phrase Pastor Diane had used. It sounded rehearsed. That was when I knew I had to leave. But leaving was not simple. They had my banking information because of the shared expenses. They knew where my parents lived because I had mentioned it during confessions. They had recordings of me saying things I would never want anyone else to hear. I felt trapped in a way I had never experienced before, not by locks or threats, but by the weight of everything I had given them without realizing it was being collected. I planned it carefully. I told them I needed to visit my parents for a family emergency, something urgent that required me to leave immediately. I packed only what I could fit in a backpack, left everything else behind, and drove straight out of the province. I did not stop until I was 8 hours away, staying in a motel in another city, too afraid to go back to my parents' house in case someone came looking. For months after, I received mail forwarded from my old address, blank envelopes with nothing inside except a postmark from that industrial park area. No letter, no message, just the postmark, like a reminder that they knew where I had been, and they could find me again if they wanted. I changed my phone number. I deleted every social media account. I moved twice more before I felt safe enough to stay in one place. I still do not know what happened to Monica. I reported it to the police, but without evidence of a crime, there was nothing they could do. She was an adult. She had left voluntarily as far as anyone could prove. The group still operates as far as I know. I have seen their job postings pop up occasionally on the same boards where I found them. Same vague language, same industrial park address. I want to warn people, but I do not know how without putting myself back in their line of sight. What I learned is that belief does not have to be religious to be dangerous. It just has to convince you that the people offering answers care more about you than they do about what they can take. And by the time you realize what you have given away, it is already too late to get it back without losing pieces of yourself you will never recover. My name is Aiden, and I spend too many nights scrolling through missing persons pages on my phone, looking at faces I have never met, reading descriptions of last known locations and clothing and distinguishing features. My girlfriend thinks it is morbid. She asks me why I do this to myself, why I cannot just let it go. I tell her I am trying to find someone, but the truth is more complicated than that. I am trying to prove that I was not crazy, that what I saw was real, and that somewhere in the bureaucracy of police reports and rental agreements and security footage, there is an answer to what happened in Unit 3B. 4 years ago, I was 22 and working as a property manager for a mid-sized company that owned furnished rental units scattered across 3 buildings in downtown Calgary. It was not glamorous work. I handled bookings, issued key codes, coordinated with cleaning staff, and dealt with maintenance requests. Most of our clients were business travelers, people in town for a week or two who needed something more comfortable than a hotel. The units were basic but clean, equipped with everything you would need for a short stay. My job was to make sure everything ran smoothly, that guests checked in and out without problems, and that the company kept making money. I was good at it. I kept detailed records, I responded to emails within an hour, and I never missed a deadline. The woman who booked Unit 3B checked in on a Tuesday in November. Her name was listed as Sarah Hollins, though I have no way of knowing if that was real. She made the reservation online, paid with a credit card, and requested a 1-week stay with the possibility of extending if needed. Nothing about the booking was unusual. I sent her the access code the morning of her check-in, along with instructions for parking and building entry. She confirmed receipt. That was the only communication we had. I did not see her in person when she arrived. Most guests preferred it that way. They used the code to get into the building, found their unit, and settled in without ever meeting anyone. Our security system logged her entry at 3:47 in the afternoon. The door to Unit 3B opened at 3:52. Everything was normal. I moved on to other tasks and did not think about her again until the following Tuesday, the day she was supposed to check out. Checkout was supposed to happen by 11 in the morning. Guests left their keys on the kitchen counter, or if they had used a code-only entry, they just locked the door behind them and walked out. By noon, the cleaning staff was scheduled to go in and prepare the unit for the next booking. At 12:30, I got a call from one of the cleaners saying the door to 3B would not open. She had entered the code twice, but the lock was not responding. I assumed it was a battery issue or a glitch in the system. I told her I would be there in 20 minutes. When I arrived, I tried the code myself. Nothing. The lock stayed red. I used the master override code, which bypassed the guest code entirely. Still nothing. I checked my system logs on my phone and saw something strange. The door had registered an exit at 3:17 that morning. Someone had left the unit just after 3, but there was no corresponding re-entry. According to the system, no one had opened that door since 3:17, which meant the unit should have been empty and ready to clean. I went down to the lobby and checked the security footage. We had cameras covering the main entrance, the elevator, and the hallways on each floor. I pulled up the feed from the 3rd floor starting at midnight. I watched the hallway for hours of footage, fast-forwarding through empty corridors and flickering lights. At 3:17, just like the system said, the door to Unit 3B opened from the inside, but no one came out. The door stayed open for exactly 8 seconds, then closed again. The hallway remained empty. I rewound and watched it again. Door opens, empty hallway. Door closes. I checked the elevator footage for the same time frame. No one used the elevator between 3 and 4 in the morning. I checked the stairwell camera. No one. I went back to the 3rd floor hallway and scanned the earlier footage, looking for any sign of Sarah Hollins leaving the building at a different time. I found nothing. As far as the cameras could tell, she had entered the building 7 days earlier and never left. I called my supervisor. I explained the situation as calmly as I could. The guest had not checked out. The door would not open. The system showed an exit at 3:17, but the cameras did not show anyone leaving. He told me to call a locksmith and get the door open, that the guest had probably left through a side exit we did not have covered and forgotten to use the main door. It sounded reasonable, except we did not have side exits. The building had one entrance. Everything else was alarmed emergency exits that would have triggered alerts if opened. The locksmith came an hour later. He got the door open in under 5 minutes. I stepped inside with the cleaner and my supervisor, who had decided to come down after I called him twice more. The unit was pristine. The bed was made. The kitchen was spotless. There were no personal belongings anywhere. No luggage, no toiletries, no phone charger, no jacket. It looked like no one had ever stayed there. But the system logs did not lie. Sarah Hollins had entered the unit 7 days earlier. The door had been opened from the inside that morning, and now she was gone. My supervisor walked through the unit slowly, opening closets and checking under the bed like he was expecting to find her hiding somewhere. He did not. He pulled up the reservation details on his tablet and confirmed that the credit card had gone through, that there was no chargeback, no cancellation request. He said it looked like she had simply decided to leave early and had cleaned up after herself. When I asked about her belongings, he shrugged and said maybe she traveled light. When I asked about the cameras, he said technical glitches happen all the time. I could not let it go. That night after my shift ended, I went back to the office and pulled every piece of data I could find on Unit 3B and Sarah Hollins. I found the original booking email. It had been sent from a generic webmail account, no phone number listed, no previous stays with the company. I reverse searched the email address and found nothing. I looked up the name Sarah Hollins in combination with Calgary, with missing persons reports, with anything that might give me a lead. There were a few people with that name, but none of them matched the age or description that would fit a solo business traveler. Then I started looking at the door logs more carefully. I noticed something I had missed before. The camera on the 3rd floor hallway had a timestamp glitch. For exactly 90 seconds around 3:17, the timestamp froze, then jumped forward. It was subtle, easy to miss unless you were looking for it, but it meant the footage was not continuous. Something had caused a gap, either a technical issue or something else. I checked the other cameras in the building for the same time frame. No glitches, just the 3rd floor. I brought this to my supervisor the next day. He looked at the logs, looked at the footage, and told me I was reading too much into a minor technical issue. He said guests leave without checking out all the time, that it was not our job to track them down as long as they paid. He reminded me that we had another booking for Unit 3B starting that weekend, and he needed me to focus on getting it ready instead of playing detective. I let it drop, at least outwardly, but I kept digging. I filed a missing persons report with the Calgary police, giving them everything I had. They took the information politely, but I could tell they did not consider it a priority. A woman had checked into a rental unit, left early, and did not tell anyone. That was not a crime. That was not even unusual. They said they would look into it if any other reports came in matching her description, but without evidence of foul play, there was nothing to investigate. The case went nowhere. Unit 3B was rented again that weekend, then again 2 weeks later, then again after that. Life went on. I processed bookings, sent codes, coordinated cleanings, but I started noticing small things. Guests in 3B complained more often than guests in other units. They reported feeling uncomfortable, hearing noises at night, finding the temperature impossible to regulate. One guest cut their stay short after 2 nights, saying they could not sleep, that something felt wrong. They did not ask for a refund, they just left. A year later, I got a call from the police. They wanted to ask me some follow-up questions about Sarah Hollins. Another guest had reported something strange about Unit 3B. This guest, a man in his 40s, said he had woken up at 3 in the morning to the sound of the door opening. When he sat up, the door was ajar, and he could see a figure standing in the hallway just outside, motionless, facing into the unit. He called out. The figure did not move. He got up and walked toward the door, and the figure was gone. When he checked the hallway, it was empty. He checked the door logs later and saw that the door had registered an opening at 3:17, but he insisted he had not touched it. The police asked me if anything like that had happened before. I told them about the original incident with Sarah Hollins, about the footage glitch, about the door opening with no one visible. They took notes but did not seem particularly concerned. They said the guest had probably been half asleep, that the door might have a faulty sensor. They thanked me for my time, and that was the last I heard from them. I quit that job 6 months later. I could not keep going into that building, walking past Unit 3B, knowing that something had happened there that no one wanted to acknowledge. I still check the missing persons pages. I still look for Sarah Hollins, whatever her real name was. I have convinced myself that if I can find her, if I can prove she went missing, then maybe someone will take it seriously. Maybe someone will go back and look at that unit, at that door, at that hallway, and figure out what I could not. But the truth is, I do not think I will ever find her. I think she is one of those people who slip through the cracks of documentation and memory, who disappear in a way that is too quiet to make headlines. And I think Unit 3B will keep renting and guests will keep checking in, and some of them will leave early without saying why, and no one will ever connect the pattern because no one is looking for one. Except me. I am still looking. I cannot stop. My name is Claire, and I used to think trains were the safest way to travel. There is something about the fixed tracks, the scheduled stops, the gentle rocking that makes you feel like nothing truly bad can happen as long as you stay in your seat and watch the landscape slide by. That is what I believed the winter I took a cross-country train through Canada alone for the first and last time. I was 23 between jobs, and I had decided that before I settled into whatever came next, I wanted to see the country properly. Flying felt too fast. Driving felt too risky in the winter, so I booked a sleeper on a long-distance train that would take me from Toronto all the way out toward the Rockies. It felt romantic and practical at the same time. I pictured myself drinking bad coffee in the dining car, reading in my berth, watching towns flicker past in the snow. My parents were nervous, but I told them trains were full of families and retirees and backpackers. I told them you are never really alone on a train. The first day lived up to the fantasy. We pulled out of the station in the gray light of early morning, snow already starting to fall. The city dropped away and the world flattened into white fields and dark lines of trees. People were friendly in that temporary way travelers are. We exchanged first names, destinations, Little bits of life stories that did not matter because we would never see each other again. I felt proud of myself for doing this. Independent, capable, completely in control. I met him in the dining car that evening. He was sitting alone at a table against the window, a paperback face down beside his plate. Late 50s, maybe early 60s, graying hair, clean shaven, wearing a sweater that looked expensive without being flashy. When the server realized I was also alone, she asked if I minded sharing a table. I said sure. He smiled as I sat down, the kind of polite, measured smile older men use when they want to seem harmless. We started with small talk. His name was Daniel. He said he had taken this route more times than he could count. He knew all the little towns along the way, the stretches where the train always slowed down, the places where people used to get on and off back when passenger rail was busier. He asked about my trip, my plans, my family. His questions were gentle, never pushing too hard, and he listened like everything I said was genuinely interesting. At first, I liked talking to him. He had that easy, soft-spoken confidence of someone used to being listened to. But after a while, the conversation shifted. He started telling stories about people who never made it to where they were going. He brought up a girl who had allegedly stepped off during a smoke break at some small-town platform in Manitoba and forgotten to get back on. He mentioned a man who had supposedly decided halfway through his journey that he wanted a different life, had disembarked at an unscheduled siding and simply vanished into the snow. Every story ended the same way. No luggage claimed, no tickets refunded, no forwarding address. I tried to joke that he was not exactly selling the safety of rail travel. He just smiled and said, "You would be amazed how many people decide they do not want to arrive where they told everyone they were going." The way he said decide made something in me tighten. He knew too many details. Which year? Which stretch of track? How the staff had reacted? How the families had been told? When I asked how he knew all this, he shrugged and said he pays attention and remembers faces. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, that people like me, young, traveling alone, no fixed schedule, made impulsive choices all the time. I changed the subject. He let me easily, like he had already planted whatever he wanted to plant and did not need to push it further. When dinner ended, he stood, touched the back of my chair lightly, and said, "Stay aware on these long routes, Claire. It is easy to miss things when the scenery never changes." I went back to my berth with a faint unease I could not explain. He had not said anything explicitly threatening. He had not crossed any obvious lines. But I locked my compartment door that night, something I had not bothered to do the night before. The second day, I noticed his routine. He seemed to float between cars, never staying in one place too long. I saw him in the observation car in the morning, in the lounge around lunchtime, then back in the dining car for dinner. He always sat where he had a clear view of the doors. He always seemed to know exactly when the staff were about to make an announcement or call last seating. Once I watched him switch tables just before a family with young kids sat down nearby, as if he had anticipated their arrival. But what really started to bother me were the unscheduled stops. Long-distance trains in winter are not perfectly punctual. Snow, freight traffic, maintenance issues, all of it can slow things down. But that day we had two brief stops that were not on the printed schedule. The first was in the middle of nowhere, just a stretch of trees and a service road. The train slowed, then stopped completely. An announcement crackled through the speakers about a signal issue that needed to be checked. We were told to stay on board. From the window of the observation car, I watched Daniel stand up casually and move toward the connection between cars. He glanced back once as if checking who was paying attention. Then he disappeared through the door toward the rear. He came back maybe 10 minutes later, expression unchanged, and resumed his seat with a fresh cup of coffee I had not seen him get from anywhere. When the train started moving again, he looked briefly satisfied, like a plan had clicked into place. The second unscheduled stop happened in the evening. This time, the announcement mentioned, minor mechanical issue, and again advised everyone to stay seated. We were in a stretch of thick forest, snow piling high against the tracks. I was in the lounge car then, half reading, half watching the reflection of the car in the dark window. In the reflection, I saw movement behind me. Daniel again slipping through the connecting door just before the train came to a complete stop. My heart started to beat faster. The air in the car felt thinner. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that he was just stretching his legs or talking to someone in another car. But a part of me, the part that remembers every word he said about people deciding not to finish their journeys, would not settle. I decided I was not going to be the girl in his story. About 20 minutes into the stop, with the train still idle and the speakers silent, he appeared in the doorway of the lounge car, scanning the room. His eyes landed on me. He smiled and walked over. "Mechanical checks are taking longer than I thought," he said. "Sometimes they let people step off for a breath of fresh air if you know who to ask. The cold wakes you up. You want to come see?" The words themselves were harmless. The context was not. We were stopped in the middle of nowhere, in the dark, in winter. There were no station lights, no platform, no staff in sight. And somehow he knew where to go, who to ask, what rules could be bent. Every instinct in me screamed. I forced a polite smile and said I was tired, that I was just going to lie down and read until we started moving again. He studied my face for a moment like he was measuring something, then nodded. "Suit yourself," he said. "Just do not sleep too deeply. This is the kind of stretch where people get on and off without anyone noticing." He turned and walked away, but instead of heading back through the car toward his own berth, he disappeared once more through the door toward the rear, into the part of the train where I had never seen him sit. I went straight back to my compartment, shut the door, and this time I not only locked it, but slid my small suitcase in front of it as a makeshift barrier. My hands were shaking as I did it, and I hated that he had gotten to me this much. I lay on the narrow bunk, fully dressed, listening to the creaks and groans of the train, the occasional muffled voices in the corridor. Every time footsteps passed my door and paused, my pulse jumped. Eventually, the train lurched and started moving again. An announcement blamed winter conditions and assured us we would make up some of the lost time overnight. I did not sleep more than an hour at a stretch. Each time I drifted off, I dreamed of doors sliding open on their own and cold air rushing in. The next morning at breakfast, I did not see him. I scanned every table, every face. Families, older couples, young backpackers, no Daniel. I told myself he could be sleeping in or eating at a different time. But as the Ayus day wore on, he never appeared in any of the cars I moved through. I started to wonder if I had invented his significance, if I had built him into a monster in my head because I was alone and afraid. Late that afternoon, near one of the scheduled stops, I overheard a fragment of conversation between two staff members in the service corridor behind the dining car. I was not supposed to be back there, but I had gotten turned around looking for the washrooms. "Told me the count was off by one of them said. "Could be a misprint on the manifest, it happens." "Still," the other replied, "you would think someone would notice if a passenger got off at the wrong stop." They noticed me then and went quiet. One of them asked if I was lost and guided me back toward the public area with a professional smile that did not reach her eyes. I did not ask about it. I did not ask if anyone named Daniel was still on board, or if anyone had failed to return after a smoke break. I kept my questions to myself and watched as our train pulled into the next station, people getting off and on in a flurry of coats and bags and cold air. I searched every face on the platform. Either he was not there or I could not recognize him anymore. Months after that trip, I was reading an article about unsolved disappearances connected to long-distance travel. Buried halfway down was a brief mention of a man in his 50s who had gone missing during a winter train journey in Western Canada in the late 90s. The accompanying photo was grainy, scanned from an old newspaper. The man stood at the edge of a crowd on a station platform, half turned away from the camera. He looked like Daniel. Same build, same hairline, same slight tilt of the head. The picture was over 20 years old. If it was him, he should have aged. But what chilled me was not the resemblance exactly. It was the familiarity in the posture, the way he stood where he could see everyone else without being the focus. I closed the article and sat there for a long time, listening to the distant sound of a commuter train passing through my city, the whistle fading into the night. I have not set foot on a long-distance train since. When people ask why, I say I get motion sick, or that I prefer to fly. I never tell them the real reason. The real reason is that on that winter trip, somewhere between the unscheduled stops and the missing passenger counts and a man who knew too much about disappearances, I realized something I cannot unlearn. On a train, you feel like you are all going the same way together. But doors open and close in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, and sometimes someone steps off that you never see again. And if anyone asks later, the record will say they chose it. My name is Nolan, and I used to think the creepiest part of a corporate job was the fluorescent lighting and the forced small talk. I thought real danger lived out on dark streets or in abandoned buildings, not behind access-controlled doors and company slogans about team culture and shared values. That belief lasted exactly 3 months into my first office job, until I found out what was really happening on a floor that officially did not exist. I was 24 when I got hired at a big glass and steel tower in downtown Vancouver. It was the kind of place that made my parents proud just to see the logo on my employee badge. I was a junior analyst, which mostly meant spreadsheets, presentations, and quietly absorbing other people's stress. The building had 30 floors on the elevator panel and a polished digital directory in the lobby. Every tenant was a respectable business: law firms, consulting companies, tech startups, a bank. It was the most boringly safe environment you could imagine. From my first week, one thing bothered me. In the fire stairwells, the painted numbers on the concrete did not match the elevator buttons. Between the parking level and the first office floor, there was another number stenciled on the wall: B14. There was no B14 on the elevator panel. According to the directory, the building's basement was just mechanical storage. But there it was in chipped white paint: 14, a floor that was not supposed to be there. At first I thought it was a leftover from some old layout, a relic from when the building had a different configuration, but every time there was a fire drill, we trudged down the stairs in a long line, and every time people went quiet for a few seconds as we passed that landing. No one stopped there. No one tried the door. It did not have the usual frosted glass window or tenant logo, just a solid gray metal door with a small black badge reader and no label. One day during my second month, my manager asked if I wanted to be part of a high-potential development group. He said it would look good on my record, that it was an internal program for ambitious employees. I was flattered. I said yes without thinking. He told me the sessions were after hours once a week, and that I would get a calendar invite with the room number. The invite came that afternoon. Location: Conference Room K. No floor indicated, just a note that said, "Meet in the lobby at 7:45 p.m. A team lead will escort you." That struck me as odd, but I assumed it was some kind of security protocol. The building closed to visitors at 8 unless they were on a list. That Wednesday, I stayed late at my desk, pretending to be productive while my coworkers packed up and left. At 7:40, I headed down to the lobby. There were 5 of us waiting near the seating area, 3 from my company, 2 from another firm in the building. We exchanged polite smiles, the awkward kind that say, "We are all trying to look like we belong here." A man in his 40s with a company-branded lanyard introduced himself as Jared and said he would be taking us to the session. He did not lead us to the elevator. He led us to the stairwell. "We use a different floor for these meetings," he said lightly. "Less distraction." We filed in behind him. The fluorescent lights hummed. Our footsteps echoed. When we passed the painted 3, 2, 1, no one spoke. When we reached the landing with B14 painted on the wall, Jared stopped. He tapped his badge against the unmarked gray door's reader. The light flashed green. The lock clicked. He pushed the door open and gestured for us to follow. The air in basement 14 felt different. Cooler, slightly stale, with a faint chemical cleaner smell under something else I could not place. The space was larger than I expected, not a cramped storage area, but a full floor with low ceilings and exposed ducts. The walls had been painted a clean white. The usual gray carpet was replaced with off-white tile that looked easy to mop. Someone had taken care to make it feel like an office, but it did not. It felt like a set built to resemble one. We were led into Conference Room K, which was really just a big open room with no windows and movable chairs arranged in a horseshoe. On one wall, instead of the usual corporate art or abstract prints, there were whiteboards covered in handwritten phrases. Not numbers or project plans, phrases. Merge intention with output. Eliminate friction between self and system. Optimize the soul to match the company. Someone had drawn little diagrams linking these ideas to floor plans and flowcharts, arrows looping back on themselves like recursive prayers. There were about 20 people already seated when we arrived, some in suits, some in business casual, all wearing the same company lanyards we had. Jared closed the door and stood at the front. "Welcome," he said. "Tonight is not about your job titles or your departments. Tonight is about alignment. The more aligned you are, the more the building can work through you." I laughed under my breath, assuming this was metaphor. Then the next 2 hours taught me it was not. The session was part motivational seminar, part group ritual. We were asked to write down our resistances, doubts about the company, frustrations with our roles, thoughts about quitting, and then read them aloud. Every time someone confessed something honest, the group responded in unison with a phrase we were told to repeat. "We absorb the friction. We convert it to power." At first, I participated the way you participate in awkward team-building exercises, half-heartedly. But the language grew stranger. They talked about the building as if it was alive, as if it had a spirit that rewarded those who aligned and punished those who did not. They spoke about merging personal identity into the structure and offering up hesitation as fuel. The longer it went on, the more it sounded less like development and more like devotion. When it ended, Jared reminded us not to discuss the program with anyone not invited. "Some people are not ready to understand what we are doing here," he said. "You have been selected because you can handle deeper integration." As we filed back up the stairs past the painted 14, no one made eye contact. It felt like we had just shared a secret we did not fully understand. I told myself it was just a strange corporate experiment, maybe something a consultant had sold the leadership team. But over the next few weeks, things escalated. The sessions became more intense. We were asked to attend additional strategy circles in basement 14. Always after hours, always through the unmarked door. In those, the language dropped any pretense of metaphor. They talked about people who refused alignment and how their careers had stalled or their departments had been quietly downsized. They celebrated employees who had merged fully, holding them up as examples. These were often people I recognized, high performers who seemed to live at the office, who spoke about their jobs like a calling rather than employment. It was hard not to notice that those people tended to get promoted faster, moved into better roles, invited to more closed-door meetings. The turning point for me was the night they brought up a woman named Rachel. Rachel had been one of the first people I met when I started. She worked 2 floors above me, funny and sharp, always willing to help. I had noticed her at the early sessions in basement 14, sitting near the front, taking notes, nodding along. Then abruptly, she disappeared. Her desk was empty. Her name vanished from the company directory. When I asked my manager what happened, he said she had decided to move on and left it at that. In one of the later Basement 14 meetings, Jared mentioned Rachel by name. He said she had chosen separation, that the building had to release her. The way he said it made my skin crawl. It sounded less like a resignation and more like an excommunication. After that, I started paying closer attention. I noticed there were no security camera bubbles in the ceilings of Basement 14, even though every other floor had them. I noticed that people who attended those sessions started talking in the same phrases, as if their vocabulary had been quietly replaced. I noticed that when someone pushed back in a meeting, questioning a metric, suggesting a project was unethical, they would stop receiving invites to Basement 14 shortly before their performance reviews suddenly turned negative. I decided I wanted out, not just out of the program, out of the building. Leaving a job can be simple on paper. You give notice, you hand in your badge, you leave. Leaving when your employers have hours of recordings of you admitting fears and doubts in a room with no cameras but plenty of phones? That felt different. I did it anyway. I found a new position at a smaller firm across the city and handed in my resignation with 2 weeks' notice. My manager was polite but distant. He did not ask why I was leaving. He did not try to keep me. The invites to Basement 14 stopped immediately. On my last day, I stayed late, waiting until most people had gone. I took the stairs instead of the elevator and walked down to the landing with the painted number 14 one final time. I stood there listening. No voices, no movement, just the hum of the building. I thought about using my badge on the door one last time to see what they were doing without me. I did not. Instead, I turned and walked back up, dropped my lanyard at reception, and stepped out into the cold air, feeling like I had surfaced from underwater. A year later, out of morbid curiosity, I walked past that building again. The tenant directory in the lobby had changed. New company names, some old ones gone. But when my eyes drifted to the emergency evacuation map on the wall, I saw the same thing that had started it all. A small, unlabeled rectangle between P and 1, reachable only by stairs. No cameras, no tenant name. Basement 14 was still there. I do not know what they are doing down there now. Maybe the program got shut down. Maybe it evolved. Maybe another company took the space and gave it a different name. I just know that when people joke about drinking the corporate Kool-Aid, I think about whiteboards covered in phrases about optimizing souls, about doors with no labels, about a woman whose name vanished from the directory and reappeared only as a warning. Everyone worries about getting lost in their work. No one worries about their work trying to absorb them. They should. My name is Haley, and there are 7 hours of my life that I cannot account for. Not because I was asleep, not because I was drunk or injured or sedated. I was awake, or at least I think I was, but when I try to reach back into that night, all I find is a blurred edge where memory should be. What I know about those hours comes from other people's fragmented recollections, from photographs we found later on a camera none of us remember using, and from the sick, crawling certainty that someone else was there with us in a place we thought was empty. It happened 3 winters ago. I was 26, working a job I hated, burned out and desperate for a break. My co-worker mentioned that his family had a cabin in rural British Columbia, about 4 hours outside the city, tucked into forest near a frozen lake. He said no one was using it over the holidays and we could borrow it for a long weekend if we wanted. No rent, no neighbors, just snow, silence, and a wood stove. I asked if I could bring 2 friends. He said sure, gave me directions and the key code for the lockbox and told me to have fun. He did not mention anything else. Maybe he did not know. Or maybe he did, and he wanted to see if it would happen again. I invited Tristan and Paige, both friends from college I had stayed close with. We loaded up Tristan's truck with groceries, sleeping bags, and enough firewood to last 3 days. The drive out was beautiful in that harsh winter way, all white fields and dark evergreens under a sky the color of old metal. Cell service dropped about an hour in. By the time we pulled up to the cabin, it was late afternoon and the light was already fading. The cabin was small and plain, the kind of place built for function, not comfort. One main room with a couch and a kitchen table, a wood stove in the corner, 2 small bedrooms barely big enough for beds, and a bathroom with a shower that took 10 minutes to produce lukewarm water. But it was warm once we got the fire going, and it felt like exactly what we needed. Isolated, quiet, hours. The first night was perfect. We cooked pasta on the tiny stove, drank wine, played cards by firelight, and talked the way you do when you are far from responsibilities and close to people who actually know you. We stayed up late laughing too loud and eventually crashed in our sleeping bags, feeling like we had successfully escaped real life for a few days. The second night is where everything breaks apart in my memory. I remember the beginning clearly. We had spent the day hiking a nearby trail, came back cold and exhausted, and made dinner around 7. Tristan found an old deck of cards in a drawer and suggested we play while the fire burned down. Paige opened another bottle of wine. I remember pouring a glass. I remember sitting at the table, warmth from the stove on my back, the smell of wood smoke and melting snow tracked in on our boots. I remember Tristan dealing the cards and making some joke I cannot recall now. I remember laughing, then nothing. The next thing I know with any clarity, I am standing outside near the woodpile in the dark, barefoot in the snow, holding a flashlight I do not remember picking up. My feet are numb. My breath is fogging the air. I am staring at the tree line like I am waiting for something to come out of it. When I turn and look back at the cabin, I see Tristan and Paige through the window, sitting at the table in the exact same positions they were in hours earlier, heads down, completely still. I stumbled back inside. My feet left wet prints on the floor. Paige lifted her head slowly when the door opened, blinking like she was waking up from something deeper than sleep. Tristan looked at me, his face blank, and said, "Where did you go?" I said I did not know. I asked what time it was. He checked his phone. It was 3:18 in the morning. The last time I remembered checking, it had been just after 9. 6 hours. Gone. Paige said she did not remember anything after sitting down to play cards either. Tristan said the same. We all had the same sick, disoriented feeling, like we had surfaced from deep water without meaning to dive in the first place. None of us were drunk. We had shared 1 bottle of wine over the course of the evening. There was no gas leak, no carbon monoxide detector going off, nothing that explained it. We tried to piece it together, asking each other what we remembered, but it was like trying to hold smoke. Paige thought she might have gotten up to use the bathroom at some point, but she was not sure. Tristan thought he might have heard a vehicle outside, but he could not say when. I had no explanation for why I had been standing outside in the snow with no coat and no shoes. Then Tristan found the camera. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, a cheap digital point-and-shoot that none of us had brought. We stared at it for a long time before anyone touched it. Finally, Tristan picked it up, turned it on, and scrolled through the photos. There were 16 images. The first few were of us sitting at the table playing cards. The angles were wrong, taken from across the room near the door, like someone had been standing there watching us. None of us remembered anyone taking pictures. In the photos, we looked normal, smiling, talking. But something about the composition felt staged, like we were actors being directed. The next few photos were taken from outside the cabin, looking in through the windows. In those, we were still sitting at the table, but our heads were down, resting on our arms, like we had all fallen asleep at the same time. The timestamp on the photos said 11:47 p.m. Then there was a photo of the front door closed, taken from the inside. Timestamp 12:03 a.m. Then a photo of the woodpile outside, illuminated by what looked like the beam of a flashlight. Timestamp 1:22 a.m. Then a photo of the three of us again, this time from a closer angle, still slumped at the table. This one was taken from just a few feet away. You could see the detail in our faces, the way Paige's hair had fallen across her cheek, the way Tristan's hand was still loosely holding a card. Timestamp 2:35 a.m. The last photo was of me. I was standing outside near the trees, barefoot, holding a flashlight, staring straight ahead. My expression was blank. I did not look scared. I did not look confused. I looked like I was waiting for instructions. Timestamp 3:16 a.m., 2 minutes before I came back inside with no memory of how I had gotten there. We did not say much after that. We packed our things in silence, left the cabin before dawn, and drove back to the city without stopping. None of us wanted to stay another night. None of us wanted to find out what might have happened if we had. When we got back, I called my coworker and asked if anything strange had ever happened at the cabin. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said his uncle, who owned the place, had mentioned that someone local keeps an eye on it when the family is not there. He said his uncle had given a spare key to someone years ago, someone who lived in the area and did maintenance in exchange for occasional use of the space. When I asked who, he said he did not know. His uncle had died 2 years earlier and no one had ever met the person with the key. I asked if anyone else had reported strange experiences there. He laughed, but it sounded forced. He said people sometimes mentioned losing time or feeling watched, but he always figured it was just the isolation getting to them. Then he asked why I was asking. I did not tell him. I just said the trip had been fine and thanked him for the recommendation. I still have the camera. I have never deleted the photos, but I have never shown them to anyone either. Sometimes late at night, when I cannot sleep, I open the file on my laptop and scroll through them slowly, trying to find some detail I missed, some clue that would make sense of it. But there is nothing. Just pictures of 3 people who thought they were alone, taken by someone who made sure we never saw them. Tristan does not talk about it anymore. When I bring it up, he changes the subject or makes a joke and moves on. Paige admitted once, after too many drinks, that she still has nightmares about waking up at that table and not being able to move, feeling someone standing behind her in the dark, breathing quietly, waiting. I do not know what happened during those missing hours. I do not know who took the photos or why, or what they did while we were unconscious or compliant or whatever state we were in. I do not know if it was drugs or some kind of psychological manipulation or something I do not have words for. All I know is that somewhere in rural British Columbia there is a cabin with a key that was never returned, and someone who knows exactly what happens when people borrow it for the weekend. And I know that every night at 3:16 a.m. I wake up, not from a nightmare, not from a sound. I just wake up, fully alert, like my body remembers something my mind refuses to show me. I lie there in the dark, heart pounding, convinced that if I turned on the light and looked at my phone, I would find a new photo I do not remember taking. A photo of me asleep taken from the foot of my bed. I have never checked. I am too afraid of what I might find. Because the worst part is not what I do not remember. The worst part is the feeling that whatever happened that night is not finished. That the missing hours were not an ending. They were an introduction. And somewhere, someone is still watching, still waiting, still holding the camera,